Okay, uh, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to reconvene our conference on freedom of the press in Latin America. We also welcome our live stream audience. And so for the second panel, well, first I wanted to again thank very much our hosts here at the Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies, the co-sponsors, the Nieman Foundation for Journalism, and the Carr Center for Human Rights Policy. And I would also like to thank in particular, Maurice Beracha and Yael Marciano, who have been kindly contributing to this conference to happen. This second panel, the moderator will be Jeffrey Seglin, who is a lecturer in public policy and director of the communication program at the Joan Shorenstein Center on the Press, Politics, and Public Policy at Harvard Kennedy School. He writes The Right Thing, a weekly column on general ethics that has been syndicated by Tribune Media Services since September 2010. And from 2004 through 2008, he wrote an ethics column distributed by the New York Times Syndicate. He is author of The Right Thing, Conscious Profit and Personal Responsibility in Today's Business, which has a lot to do with the end of the discussion of our first panel in the morning. So let us welcome Jeffrey, who will be in charge of this session. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Thank you. Welcome. I've been asked to remind you that we're live streaming the event at nieman.harvard.edu, although I think that's more useful for the people who actually need that address who aren't in the room. And there's a hashtag on Twitter at LatAmPress, which is hashtag LatAmPress on Twitter if people are following or want to tweet as they're going along. And I'm going to introduce Pablo Corral, who's going to run down the stairs as I interview him. Pablo Corral Vega is an Ecuadorian constitutional lawyer and photojournalist whose work has appeared in National Geographic Traveler, the Smithsonian Magazine, the New York Times Sunday Magazine, we can time this really just right, Audubon, the French, German, Spanish, and Russian editions of Geo, and other international publications. He is the creator and editor of Nuestro Mirada, the largest online network for photojournalists in Latin America. His work has been exhibited throughout the world, and he's published 6 books of photography, including Ecuador, Andes, and 25 published by the National Geographic Society, in which Mario Vargas Llosa wrote 20 short stories inspired by the photos, and he is a 2011 Nieman Fellow at Harvard.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm going to read some notes, but before that, I wanted to make a few comments. This is the best moment for media, the best moment for communication, but it's probably the worst moment for journalists. Nobody needs journalists anymore. If you think about it, Hugo Chavez has 2 million followers in Twitter. Why would he need journalists to communicate with his people? He doesn't anymore. But the same thing is happening over and over. People are realizing that journalists as intermediaries are not needed anymore. People write their own blogs, they produce their own news. If you think about it, when we get into Facebook, what we're paying attention to is the news that our friends send our way. We're reading news when we read Facebook updates. News that are relevant to us. Why would all these people need journalists? So journalists, I think, are a little lost. We don't know what our place in society is. These governments that are becoming more and more powerful are using media in ways that were impossible before, just a few years ago, were impossible. Now they have realized, these governments have realized that they can own their own media empires, that they can communicate directly with the people. Citizens are realizing the same thing. Well, why do I need to go to that newspaper? Why do I need to read that newspaper when I can read the news from my friends? When I can read the current event through Twitter and get information directly from the people who are in the field. So the place of journalism is changing radically, and we are feeling a little lost. We don't know what is that we need to be doing at the moment. We're extremely frustrated because we feel like we're losing power. We used to have a lot of power. Journalists used to have a lot of power. Oh, if you don't do that, I'm going to write it in my newspaper, and I'm going to publish it here, and people would be terrified. It doesn't happen anymore. People are not that afraid of media. But in order to get to power, you do need media. Why? Because you need to be known. The first step in order to win an election is to be known. So you need to be in the media. But once you get to power, why do you need media anymore? Why do you need journalists anymore? Especially journalists. Media you do need. You need to communicate. But why do you need journalists? Actually, when you get to power, you need to destroy those mechanisms that brought you to power. You need to make sure that no new leaders appear. So I think we're asking the wrong questions when we're talking about journalism. We're not realizing that the ground is shifting below us. The Romans understood politics very well. They realized that what a good government does is offer bread and circus to its people. And I tell you, it's a lot of fun to be in Latin America. We have these leaders that are extraordinary communicators. Something is happening all the time. These very powerful presidents are fun to watch. They say interesting things. They're always challenging the people. They're always saying things that you would have never heard before. They are communicators. And we are completely behind. We're saying, oh, we're the victims. They're treating us poorly. They don't give us the freedoms. Well, things are changing rapidly. We are powerful. We journalists are powerful. Yes, very powerful. We can build new leaders. We can bring people to power. We can even inquire about where the money comes from and where the money is going, which is the whole raison d'etre of investigative journalism. But our place in society is not guaranteed. If we don't do a good job, if we don't do the things that we can do exclusively right, we're not going to have a place in the future. In the late 70s, many Latin American countries were under military dictatorships. Almost all were repressive, far-right, and supported in one way or another by the United States as part of its global anti-communist strategy. The return of democracy in the 80s raised great hopes, but the neoliberal policies implemented in the region have meant further impoverishment of the poor and enrichment of the rich. The populations in many countries quickly discovered that democracy is not synonymous with equality. People are extremely disappointed with democracy in Latin America. Not long ago, I was in Venezuela doing a story for Smithsonian, and I was talking to a lady, a really poor lady around Plaza Bolivar, and I asked her, well, what does Chavez mean to you? And she opened her wallet and she showed me 3 photographs. There was a photograph of her children, a photograph of the Lady of Coromoto, which is the most revered virgin in Venezuela, and a picture of Chavez. And she said, he's our father. He's the only one who understands us. So when you see that kind of emotional connection, you realize that we're talking about a totally different thing, that it's not just about journalists or the place of the media. People want to have hope. The most serious structural problem in Latin America is the lack of hope, or to put it another way, the lack of social mobility. For a person born into a poor family, the possibility of significantly improving socioeconomic status is minimal. There are many reasons for this immobility. They include limited access to services, weak education systems built on rote memorization, ineffective public health systems, malnutrition, justice systems that don't work, and governments that fail to protect citizens. On top of all that, there are also subtle lines that shape society according to the way someone speaks. We still have a lot of racism in Latin America. There's a magical belief in redemption, precisely because there's this lack of hope. The arrival of an enlightened leader. Because of that belief, Latin American politicians have turned themselves into salespeople, hawking hope. Caudillos have always existed in Latin America. They are charismatic leaders who can be positive heads of their communities, and they can morph into strongmen. They've come from the right and the left. They've emerged from the military ranks and the civilian population. Some seized power in coups, many were elected. What they all share is a capacity to create a deep emotional bond with their country. The leader loves his people, and because he loves them, he cannot be wrong. A charismatic leader is born, but also built. The populism we've seen recently in Latin America has been characterized by a systematic use of polling and the mass media. While the process starts with a leader who is so in love with himself and his vision that he's willing to take on the role of the redeemer, bringing that idea into being now requires a powerful team of communications and political experts to study and measure every impact of the things that the leader makes. Unlike in the past, we're now seeing a highly sophisticated populism driven by polling and marketing. Omar Rincon, a Colombian journalist, author, and professor of media and communications, talks about telepresidentes, or TV or media presidents. He argues that it is a mistake to analyze politics in Latin America through the lens of democracy. Rather, we should use the lens of the telenovela, the soap opera. In this tale, we see a person with a pure heart come across a poor suffering victim, the people. He alone or she alone can rescue them from their suffering. These telepresidentes, according to Rincon, are close to the people but far from democracy. They have discovered they can communicate directly with the people. They have no need for journalists or media owners. They can build with public funds their own media empires. The central thesis of the new left that emerged from this wave of disappointment in democracy is that while capitalist democracy may be representative, it does not bring well-being to the marginalized, and it's necessary to build in its place direct participatory democracy. The trap of direct democracy, in which most decisions are made through referendums, is a weakening of the separation of powers, with its checks and balances, and erosions of the rights of minorities. Both are cornerstones of democracy. But what this lady who has in her wallet the picture of Chavez, the lady of Coromoto, and her children, give any value to separation of powers or rights of minorities? These are very abstract concepts that people don't relate to. Democracy has not been able to bring well-being to people in Latin America, so people are extremely frustrated with democracy. In this environment, it's natural that we see the emergence of enlightened caudillos who embody the people and in so doing are not subject to limits in the exercise of power. The regimes quickly become electoral authoritarianism, and the media, in the absence of institutional mechanisms for discussion and disagreement, become the main political opponents. If the support of the people is what gives them authority, there's no higher priority for these governments than to be popular. Being popular, of course, is not only a necessity of leftist governments. Popularity is what allowed Fujimori to dissolve Congress and establish a regime of systematic police espionage and blackmail. It is what allowed Uribe to fight a dirty war against the guerrillas and his political opponents, too. If I have the support of 60% or 70% of the population, these leaders seem to say, I cannot be wrong. The media is one of the great powers. In fact, it is almost impossible to get to political power without their support. The sine qua non for election is to be known. In other words, visible in the media. Some governments try to control the media ecosystems that allow them to come to power, removing opposition voices, watchdogs, political commentators, any outlet that might generate new ideas, or especially new leaders. Control of the press is not a matter of freedom of expression. We have to understand this. It is a matter of power. Control of the press is an essential requirement to stay in power indefinitely. As in other parts of the world, journalism in Latin America has significant flaws. And I don't want to generalize because there are wonderful media and wonderful newspapers and wonderful TV stations in Latin America. But many newspapers are owned by powerful families who have supported conservative governments. Journalists' salaries are low, the training is poor, there isn't enough investigative journalism, and when it's done, it may not draw on a range of reliable sources or conduct the work in a systematic and balanced way. There are segments of society that do not appear in the media at all, whose needs and interests are invisible. There's a great deal of tabloid journalism, some television news is low quality, some outlets practice what amounts to blackmail. Undoubtedly, it is necessary to democratize the media, creating new spaces or new outlets for the voiceless, outlets that promote investigative journalism and citizen oversight. It would be valuable to establish some form of regulatory mechanisms for the press that are completely independent of the government and also the media's business interests. But without an independent media, there's an abyss. It's impossible to think society would benefit if the current media, it's not the perfect media, but it's the one we have, were gone or silenced. Journalists play a key role in monitoring governments. A free and critical press is an essential prerequisite for democracy. Repressive governments urge the press to be objective. Objectivity does not exist. The angle reporters take on news is always colored by ideology. Because there are no apolitical, perfectly neutral or objective journalists, it's critical that journalists act with diligence and good faith and draw on a range of sources. On the other hand, to punish them because of their point of view is to deny the value of pluralism. These same governments argue that the media are inherently compromised because they're businesses. It's bad faith to claim that the media should operate without being profitable, because it implicitly pushes for the disappearance of private media. The only media that can operate without profits are public media, which in Latin America are unfortunately always the voice of the incumbent government, not society. In several countries in Latin America, there are dramatic struggles going on between the government and the media. The rulers want to communicate directly with their people without independent journalists getting in the way. They seek to co-opt, conquer, or eliminate the critical media. Their power lies in their popularity, and thus they seek to root out all criticism or oversight. And the media, which have become political opponents in the absence of political institutions for debate and deliberation, has forgotten that its main function is to do good journalism.
Thank you. Our next speaker, I suppose I have to do this. Sorry. Yes. I'm sorry to reach over. Is Claudia Méndez Arriaza. Claudia is the editor and staff writer at El Periódico in Guatemala, where she has covered the courts and worked as an investigative reporter, often focusing on human rights crimes, the drug trade, and state corruption stories. She also co-hosts a national television news program, and she received the National Prize of Journalism for her reports on the trial for the assassination of Monsignor Juan Girarde, and her articles have been published in a number of Latin American journals. She is a 2012 Nieman Fellow at Harvard, and I believe you have slides.
After that.
After your presentation, okay. So
Yeah.
please welcome Claudia.
So it is a great honor for me to be sitting here next to you, gentlemen. It is a great honor to be the only lady in the round table, and I'm honored to have a public like you. So we were given this title for this round table, which is The Good, the Bad, and the Powerful. And I've been thinking about who is the good, who is the bad, and who are the powerful. So I wrote this little story about the good, the bad, and the powerful in my country, and I believe this story can be similar in every region in the world. So the only fact that I can state right now is that the good, the bad, and the powerful will always make news. Newspapers have cover stories of the bad, from the mafias in Italy to the gangs in Chicago, and lately on the drug lords in Latin America. At the same time, sheets of papers have been written about the good. I'm thinking about the fabulous stories about the genius from Asia to prodigies in Europe and the incomparable talent from our countries. It is easy here to tell the difference in between the good, the bad, and the power they bear. But today I'd like to tell you a story from Guatemala, where the line that divides the good from the bad becomes very blurry, and doing journalism in such a context becomes more than a challenge. I still ask myself, who are the good, the bad, and the powerful in our stories? So the story begins in a prison. The name of the prison is Pabon. It was a unique prison in the world. It's 10 miles away from the city of Guatemala, and it was a jailhouse managed and governed by their own inmates. In a historic raid in the 80s, they proposed to the state to play a less interventionist role, to limit its function as the gatekeeper of that prison and let them, the players, take care of their own business in the inner field. If the state accepted, then the inmates will guarantee no more raids and no one will ever flee from that prison. So are you able to tell here what's the difference in between the good and the bad? And who was really the powerful here in this story? So the events evolved to the point where the leaders of Pabon, they were believers of a free economy market. They made business with transnational companies. So when Coca-Cola initiated its distribution inside this prison, Pepsi-Cola claimed for its rights. So when they had the Telefónica, the Spaniard company, to install the telephone booths there in the prison, well, the competitors from everywhere claim for their own rights as well. All the products entered this prison through the main gates. And the state was playing its role, only a referee, no intervention at all. And the inmates became the lords of successful business inside the prison. So one can imagine what the telephones were used for. I'm telling you that authorities have pointed out that thousands of extortions came out from that prison. And who let the telephones get in? Who were the good and the bad? Can you still see the line that divides the good from the bad? Well, don't think that the business ran from the prison were limited to the telephones or the sodas. A cartelito, which is a baby cartel to distribute drug in the city, emerged from that prison. It was a very well-organized crime network. Their money was connected to judges, magistrates, police, and army officers. One member of that ring told me later, when some events took place there, that their connections reached the real powerful of that country. And I still kept on asking myself, who were the powerful, the bad or the good? But how to answer that question is if we have not the clearer picture, who were the good and the bad. So one day, during the dawn, it was 3 a.m. in the morning, the prison was surrounded by 3,000 soldiers and hundreds of policemen. They were singing in a choir, "A target we have." Tanks and helicopters surrounded Pabon. And although the prisoners surrendered to the official force, 7 inmates were executed. They opened fire against authority, was the official version, and since the objective of this operation was to save the prison and save the Guatemalans from such criminals, we have to kill them. I'm thinking about the saber you were talking about. So the post-mortem examination showed that the inmates were tortured before executed. And the forensic report revealed that the victims had been shot at a close range, less than 5 inches. So the conclusion was the police and army had committed extrajudicial execution. But the big question was, why? One of them told me, no sense at all that 7 men were to confront 4,000 soldiers. They have tanks and helicopters all above us. Now the question was the reason. The profile of the victims show that the police force went after the leaders of the cartel. Most of them were about to leave the prison, for they had complied with their sentence. And so during the events of that dawn, the chief of the cartel had managed to escape to another prison where the prisoners were transferred. Police went after him, took him back to Pavón, and they executed in his own house. Yes, he had a comfortable house in this prison. So who were the criminals here? The survivors had claimed that the reason of the killing was one and simple. It was a competition, business competition. A prosecutor's office sponsored by United Nations has investigated this case, and in the midst of allegations of corruption and attempts to stop the investigation, top officials from that time have been accused of the 7 murderers. Extraditions have been asked to Austria, Switzerland, and Spain, where the high officers ran away after those events. Among them, members of the political and economical elite in Guatemala, who in defense claim that they were the savers of the Guatemalans from the criminals of that prison. But up to this point, we have not heard the explanation of why the prisoners were executed in the way the examination showed later. Was it for competition, as the members of the cartel claim? Again, the question of this roundtable: can you tell who were the good and the bad and the powerful in this story? I'm not trying to become a cynical here with a story that is making you laugh as I can see you. What I'm trying to illustrate here are the challenges of the press in my region, covering the good, the bad, and the powerful. The tale of Pavón helps me to picture that situation. We are covering criminal and corrupted networks that are fragmented and expanded to the point that, as in Pavón, the state is a phantom, just keeping the gates of the game. As it happened in the prison, institutions have been captured and have become a free rein for many actors, both the good and the bad. Criminal, political, and economical elites have understood that the state is not an enemy, but a means to pursue the interest. As the story of Pavón showed, unveiling corruption is not limited to public sector. It has been proved how public, private, and criminal networks merge to rule under their codes. As the soda companies were fighting to get a share of the market in Pavón, I think about the stories of the banks in the United States and how we have learned that the flow of cash of the drug trade saved them from the crisis. The press has worked with relative freedom, but there are always risks from different types. There is not a state of policy now in my country to prevent the press from telling what we want, but there are many other risks. Personal security. In 7 years, 20 journalists have been assassinated. We cannot compare that number to the 3,050 journalists that were assassinated during the almost 40 years war that we suffered in Guatemala. But right now we're keeping the records under the table. I mean, Cerigua, which is an organization, an alternative media in Guatemala, is counting the threats against journalists. And their statement is that the journalists inside the country are not denouncing when they are victims. Now, I like to say that there's another power, and that's our main challenge right now. It's the economical freedom. We're still working within this business model, which doesn't allow us to speak the truth openly. And I brought here some pictures of how this is the work of Sandra Sebastian. She is a fantastic photograph. And I made a collection of her work, and she,
How do you want
you'll
to start?
see here.
What-
I can put it.
How do you want to start it?
How we have changed from covering war and post-war to the criminal networks not working here. So these are the phases of violence that we are covering. This is a usual image. You can find it almost every week in Guatemala. And these are still images that we confront nowadays from the war. So we are dealing with both processes at the same time. I like this picture for one reason. This is the new generation of journalists, and they are waiting for the new president of Guatemala to come to the first press briefing. So this tells you that among this process, in the middle of all this, there is a new generation of journalists trying to tell that with all the challenges and risks that it implies. And I'd like to end up my presentation with the optimism of that image.
Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Carlos Eduardo Huertas. Carlos is the investigations editor at Semana magazine and founder of Consejo de Redacción, or Newsroom Council, a professional association that promotes investigative journalism in Colombia. Huertas has worked for Semana for the past decade. In that time, his team's coverage of corruption, human rights violations, and environmental issues has earned national and international awards. He was part of the team that won the King of Spain Award in 2008 and the Institute for Press and Society and Transparency International Award for Best Investigative Journalism in Latin America in 2007 and 2009. He is a 2012 Nieman Fellow at Harvard University. Welcome, Carlos.
Thank you very much.
So you can see?
Oh, okay. Thank you to the Carter Center for Human Rights Policy and the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies and the Nieman Foundation for the invitation. When I spoke to the organizers to find out the aim of the conference, I was glad to hear that in the consideration of freedom of the press in Latin America, there will be two panels that focus on information, which ultimately is the raw material of our business as journalists. Maybe it's probably I look as an optimistic person, but I love to work in the answers. It is clear that in Latin America we have to address several parallel processes. One of these is without a doubt all the work needed so that the freedom of the press is no longer limited, that it exists in some of our countries because of the violence, corruption, and in some regimes that appear to be undemocratic, as Monica and Boris talked in the morning. The courage and bravery of many colleagues in the region is amazing, and they pay a high price given these serious limitations. Unfortunately, it must be said, in the Americas, some traditional media have neglected their role as the watchdog of the democracy. Let me try. Some traditional media have neglected their role as the watchdog of the democracy. In some cases, it responds to the pressure in order to ensure the survival of their profits, and sometimes simply to curry the favor of the governments. But the end result is the same. They appear to be quite laid back about the abuse of power. In the evocative name of this panel, the good, the bad, and the powerful in journalism and the media in Latin America, that part would correspond to the bad. But the other process on which we must to let down our guard is that of aiming to convey relevant information of public interest in a timely manner so that the 500 million people who live in the region will have criteria on which to base their decisions, thereby contributing to growth of our democracies in transition. And that is where I think that the local news in each country is living out a sea of information in which many things are happening. In particular, I am referring to information on transnational issues in Americas. This is my read according to the recent years after being with two hats at the same moment, at the same time. One of these as an investigative journalist in the mainstream media in Colombia, and the other hat as a founder of a nonprofit organization that promotes the investigative journalism. In fact, this is the focus of my Nieman Fellowship year with the generous support of the Nine Foundation. To illustrate what I mean by a sea of information that goes unnoticed, let me make a comparison between fishing and journalism. The good news in that is in this sea of information there is a lot of fishes, a lot of powerful fishes. On the one hand, in the Americas, the institutions are very active. I don't know what that is not work. The institutions are very active. The pioneer indeed was the OAS in 1948. Then in the 60s, the ALAC and the CAN. In the 70s and 80s came CELA, the Andean Parliament, and the ALADI. And in the 90s and the early years of the new century are Mercosur, ALBA, UNASUR, and MILA that never got off the ground. Without a doubt, all kinds of joint initiatives have intensified in the regions. I'm not sure about the efficiency of having so many endeavors, although this is a very Latin American characteristic. But something is happening in this world of transnational bureaucracy that the people generally know little about and the press is not reporting. On the other hand, activities in the business world are becoming increasingly more intense. In 2005, 5 Latin American companies made it into the Fortune 500 ranking of the world's biggest company, and in 2011, there were 12. According to the Forbes magazine, the world's richest man is Mexican Carlos Slim, who has many business in the Latin American region, and another South American from Brazil. It's also ranked in the top 10 richest men. The Boston Consulting Group lists of 100 global challenger companies, and it included 18 Latin American companies in 2006, and in 2008 the number rose to 22, where it remains. It demonstrates that between the private sector and the government initiatives, a sea of information is produced, and its audience is influential in key decisions for the development of the region. But perhaps the most pervasive transnational activity in the Americas is that of certain predators. And issues such as organized crime and corruption have long been traditional activities, as the drug trafficking and the laundering money. They are a real powerful and a real threat for our societies. In the transnational scenario, the press has remained in the background. There had been some regional efforts and several serendipity accidents that has been important, for example, or it has been useful in cases of weapon trafficking in Argentina and Central America, in case of corruption in South America and Colombia, and fraud in Colombia too, but it is not enough. If you were to graph what is happening, press coverage will be far less than what is going on in the sea. And of course, the line that indicates the people's knowledge of these events is ever lower. What does powerful mean? That the region has developed an interesting ecosystem of journalism organizations that, in addition to being concerned about the quality of journalism, are interested in viewing the America from a regional perspective. The first association focusing on these issues began working in the mid-90s. There were the new Ibero-American Journalism Foundation and the Press and Society Institute. As of 2002, largely due to the important work for the Night Center of Journalists in the Americas, a valuable number of organizations arose as ABRAGI in Brazil, FOPEA in Argentina, Consejo de Redacción in Colombia, CEPET in Mexico, Red de Periodistas de la Provincia in Peru, FOPET in Paraguay, followed by others, training organizations as CELAP in Panama or Periodistas de a pie in Mexico. And new media are also emerging, as CIPER in Chile or El Faro in El Salvador. I am sure that an initiative that is based on mutual contributions from these local efforts will be a suitable starting point to good results, to good fishing. Interesting reflections in a similar vein are being produced for other viewpoints, such as a South American project recently presented by a group of urban planners here at Harvard. This project had sparked wide-ranging debate on the models of urban development that emerged by superimposing the map for resource extraction projects with regional integration projects along corridors of mobility. I have no doubt that from a journalistic perspective, similar reflections on issues such as infrastructure, natural resources, technology, inclusion, and organized crime would not only enrich the news agenda with a transnational perspective, but that this will be important as an input for the development of the Americas. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we open the floor to questions, I had a question for everybody. I mean, it's fascinating, the fish metaphor and the deciding the difference among the good, the bad, and the powerful. There seems to be a connection. I guess one of the things to touch on what Pablo said in the beginning, where he talked about Chavez having 2 million followers, although it's been 20 minutes, so he could have 2.5 million followers by now. And I wonder if there's a perception that for the media to have power with new social platforms, or to reach where they want to reach, to identify the good, the bad, and the powerful, or to bring together the various groups that you're talking about, if reach meaning how many followers they have, how many people they reach, is that important to address issues of the powerful when their leadership is in question? Is that too long a question? How important is reach? That's a shorter version for social media, and does social media give you that opportunity?
Do you want to start? It's a war. And it's about penetration and reach. And if you think about it, it's the radio that really matters and the television that really matter. The printed press, I mean, reaches just a few people. really. I mean, even the big newspapers can reach 100,000 people, 200,000 people. Op-ed pieces can be read by 30,000, 40,000, even in the bigger countries like Argentina. So it's not about the press. Obviously, it's not about the press. It's about the bigger media, the television and the radio. And obviously, governments know that. So social media is showing us the trend, but in Latin America, it's not a reality. The penetration of social media is very small. Of course, you can reach those people who are connected, who normally are richer, and who normally have power. That's the meaning of social media. When you post something in Facebook and you have some friends who are well connected, well, you're reaching those friends who are well connected. But you're not reaching the people in the countryside, you're not reaching the people who have no electricity. So let's not be confused. The power of social media is very relative. In the future, it will be extremely important, but it's not now.
Is it important to Chavez?
It is important because you have to be present in every space, every communication space. We're talking about governments that care about communication, that know the power of communication. It's governments that have reformed the law, the constitution, so they can control the institutions. Governments that pay a lot of attention to the military because they know that the military can give a coup. And governments that know how important the media, the communication, direct communication with the people are. I would say that these governments have a three-legged stool, a three-legged chair, like the one that President Faust has here at Harvard. If you're missing one of the legs, it's not gonna work. So you need to have the democratic facade, change the constitution, change the law. You need to control the military, and you need to control the media. Otherwise, you're not gonna stay too long in power. So we have to be a lot more practical when we talk about social media. We have to be a little bit more realistic.
But how do you weigh, Claudia, when you talk about the types of stories you described in the jails, how do you weigh the importance of, the importance of reach? We're talking about technology, and I forget to talk into the mic, but the importance of reach with the responsibility that you have as a journalist. Which is more important?
To talk about reach, first we have to talk about access. And to talk about access, first we have to talk about education. I mean, the reach is very low because few people get access to this. And it's because of education. It's very similar. I mean, my answer will be very similar to that. I mean, it's a matter of education. You don't have majority access to social media.
I think in the similar way that Claudia, the first thing is what kind of democracies we have in Latin America. When in Colombia, 45% of the population are below the poverty line, and in Guatemala, 65% people are on literacy, and it's similar numbers in each country. And of course, that means something different in our countries that the technology means here in the States. And then the other hand, the process that the media here in the States has happened in the recent years about technology, about the economic crisis, are different too in our countries. Because in our countries we have this crisis at the end of the 90s, not now. But our media, the mainstream media, are prepared for the new times, and the best way to maintain their profits is to reduce the quality of their product. Yes, but the interesting thing is, I believe a lot of journalists are worried about what happened with the technology, what happened with the internet, what happened with WikiLeaks, and for me, I understand that these kind of situations are a new specimen in the ecosystem of the information, and our business is the information, yes? And maybe I try to talk something that Claudia said in his wonderful exposition is maybe we need to create a new cartel for journalism in the Latin America to work through the information, yes? But we have tools. A lot of organizations are created, and they are really worried, and they are work together to do things. We don't need the media.
I think I'm getting the signal from Leonardo to ask if there are questions in the audience that can take the form of questions.
He has it.
I guess.
No problem. She's my favorite.
Can you identify yourself? And
Yeah,
then,
hi. I'm Melissa Ludke. I edit Nieman Reports at the Nieman Foundation. You know, Pablo, you began with sort of the provocative statement about we don't need journalists now, and yet, as I've listened to each of the three presentations, it seems to me that there's more reason than ever why journalists are needed. So, you know, if we can sort of switch the proposition around and say, how is it that journalists can find a place in this circumstance that exists right now, with a low literacy rate, perhaps, with understanding, you know, the possibilities of technology, but also the limitations? I mean, try to imagine, if you accept the fact that journalists are needed more than ever, we could still debate that, how is it that they can find a role at this point, at such a vital time that you have all laid out for us?
well, given especially what you've said about literacy rates, about access, what is the answer? Good luck.
Thank you. I don't know the answer, but I'm going to try. There are too many poor people in Latin America. I mean, that's the bottom line. The reason why these governments have connected with the people is because they are dealing with the issue that is the most pressing. People sense a complete lack of hope. People feel stuck. There's no hope of mobility. There's no hope of an improvement of life conditions. People are stuck. And a politician comes and says, I will get you out of there. I will do something so that you don't stay there forever. I will pay attention to you. And these politicians actually talk in the language of the people, of the simple people, of the poorer people. And nobody has paid attention to them before. I photographed a lot in Venezuela. I did a story for the Smithsonian. And I went to the hills. And I was talking to the people, and people were not completely thrilled with Chavez. They were not totally in love. But they were saying, he pays attention to us. We exist. We didn't exist before. So journalists need to think about which issues are important and which ones are the issues. We have too much information at the moment. A lot of information going. We have social media, we have our friends writing us emails, we don't have enough time to read all the things that come our way. So we obviously, as journalists, cannot compete in that field. We don't have the capacity to produce so much information that we can occupy the hearts and minds of readers, like many magazines are doing. I mean, they're trying to do these micro news, lots of little things here and there. People think that that's the future of journalism. I think the role of journalists is to do what journalists have always been meant to do: challenge the government and give voice to the voiceless. Those are the two main functions of journalism. Ask the questions. Where's the money going? Where's the money coming from? Where's the money going? Why these people are not being paid attention to? So I don't believe in objectivity, in journalism objectivity. Oh, we have to be so pure, we have to be so good. That doesn't exist. We have to be engaged, we have to be committed. We need committed journalists who care. And when journalists start caring, they will connect a lot better.
No, I would like to add to that. It's not only the government who we have to demand to. I mean, it's the whole society. As the story of this person show how the private and public sector and the criminal sector merge to sustain a system. I mean, that is what we have to reveal, and we have to keep on asking. I mean, we've been covering thousands and thousands of stories, but what about education? I mean, if the problem, as we're saying here, is illiteracy there, I mean, I was really surprised when I heard during one of our seminars that one newsroom here, I can't remember the organization, had 50 reporters to cover education. And I thought, 50 reporters to cover education. I couldn't believe it. So it's about demanding, but having it clear, as we're talking about the good, the bad, and the powerful, that it's a job of the society, not only the government.
I want to add something of the last comments. It's not only the governments, it's not only the society, it's the people that has the power. And the power in Latin America, we have the richest man in the region, in a region that has a huge inequity. Something's happened there. Yes. We have a lot of organized crime organizations that they want to take the power, they want to take the control of the states. It's happened in Colombia with the paramilitaries. And the press works an important and a relevant role for the democracy in Colombia to show what's really happened with this kind of movements. What's happened now in Guatemala, what's happened now in Mexico. We need to, and a strategic way, I think, is to try to thin out our local troubles. It's try to thin an overview for all the region. Because I understand we have, all the country has a strong local problems, but we need to work together because that is a good way to show Monica said in the morning, all international help is good for the local situation. And we need to work in this way, is my point.
Can I just follow up just for one observation, and that is trying to go back to the point that was made earlier that maybe sort of animated my first question, which was talking about how little these segments of society are covered and how they are sort of played to by the political people. So when you have these technologies that you can literally take out of the newsroom and bring into communities, you see in India, in some of the same regions of that country where the illiteracy rates are high and people don't have a connection to the broader society, and you have this classification of people, that literally journalists are taking the tools of journalism out into those communities and having those people tell their own stories as a way to connect them to what media is and to what storytelling is about and what news is about, and that their lives have some value in terms of news. And I'm just wondering whether there isn't a time to begin to think out of the box so that you're not thinking only about what happens inside a newsroom, but what the technology enables you to do outside to reach a population that you haven't succeeded in reaching in any other way, and have them become part of the process.
Claudia, how much do you do that with the photos you showed us? How much of what you're doing is precisely that? Do you bring the tools out to the public, or are you just on the other side of the camera? You're not a photographer. Who's taking those shots?
Sandra Sebastian.
And
no, we publish the photos in the paper, but the paper is very limited, as
So you
Melissa
don't
is
engage
pointing
that type
out.
of thing?
Yeah, we do not
You're
engage in that way. Yeah.
Great. There.
Can you hear?
Yes.
Okay. Some minutes ago, the panel kind of agreed on the idea that penetration is crucial, and that social media are not such an important player because there is a matter of difficulty in access. But and the other part of that equation is that you have a kind of a barrier on the side of education, because there are very big chunks of the population have not been properly educated. But if you look at Latin America today and you look at the example of cell phones, I mean, cell phones, the penetration of cell phones is humongous. It's absolute. And many of the social media and many other sources of information are running on cell phones. And there's another part related to the education, at least in my country, in Venezuela, is that education, complex thinking. There can be very complicated things like playing to the horse races. I mean, horse racing in Venezuela is a huge sport. I mean, people do it every single week, and many people have to read all these informations about the horses, and they do so many complicated reasoning to play horse racing. So I think there is kind of a gap there that perhaps social media, journalists haven't been adept at covering and trying to fill that gap. That is my impression. Pardon me? Leonardo Vivas, Carr Center for Human Rights Policy. Thank you.
I'm detecting by the fact that that didn't go up at the end, that wasn't a question so much as an observation.
No, that's something I would like to ask them, what they think about that.
Well, I was thinking about these women I met before getting here. Yes, there's a very deep and profound penetration of cell phones in Guatemala. And we even publish stories about more telephones than people in the country. We are 14 million inhabitants, and we have registered 17 million of mobile lines. But the fact is that, I'm thinking about this woman, and she will never use her little phone to get information. She communicates with it, but it's not the type of device that will make her rise, I'm thinking about this while I was hearing to you. So even though we have that penetration, the telephone is still not used as we wished.
But it will.
It will in the future.
I think we need, as Melissa said, we need to think outside the box and maybe to copy successful models and in South Africa, or as an Indian said. But this way, introduce a new player in the information channels is the cell phones company. And it's an interesting point to think about that. And the other thing is, I think one of the values that in our democracies are a huge power concentrated in small hands is that we have the opportunity to talk with the decision makers. And it's different, the information, to the people that work in this kind of companies. The multi-Latinas companies are 66 multi-Latinas. The people that work in the bureaucracy, in the international bureaucracy, they understand what's really happening. How these people now is reading the region? Through the economists? Who is talking about what really happened in the region? Nobody. Yes? And we have an opportunity in there because they are maker decisions and they use smartphones and we can send messages.
Is it that no one's talking about it, or that you're not, or no one's reading about, or listening, or hearing, or seeing?
In my point of view, nobody talking about it.
So they're not doing the journalism to
No.
begin with?
Some serendipities situations, no. but not in a regular way to words to read the Americas in this perspective, in the perspective of the development, maybe. Yes.
Do we have other questions? I can't see. Oh, yes, over. Do you have a microphone? I don't, but I can. You will. You will. Can you identify yourself? I'm sorry.
I'm Gabriela Jaramillo from the Kennedy School. I think you have to turn on. Hi. No? Yes. I'm Gabriela Jaramillo from the Kennedy School in Ecuador. And I guess my question is more on another hard question on the how-to. And Pablo, you talked about how media has become this political opposition instead of good journalism. And I've seen in my country this escalation between the government and the media. But what do you envision a parallel story? How could that have been?
A what?
A parallel story.
A parallel.
Unfortunately, I think the media is condemned to be a political player. And let me explain you why. If you change the Constitution in such a way that you control most institutions, you control the Supreme Court, you control the courts, you control the controller, you control the Attorney General, you control everything that is there to control. There are no institutional mechanisms to process dissent. So if you have a problem with the state, with the government, there's nowhere you can go to get some sort of solution for your problem. And you're either with the government or against the government. There's nothing institutionalized. There's nothing that you can use to process your conflict. And that's happening with the indigenous movement in Ecuador. It's very clear. There are 197 indigenous leaders who are being prosecuted for terrorism. The indigenous movement was a very important part of Correa's support at the beginning. But now the government is trying to break the movement, to divide the movement, and is trying to basically offering some of the indigenous leaders positions in the government. Some have become ambassadors. But, for example, let's say that El Universo disappears and all the other newspapers, all the other independent newspapers. Are the indigenous leaders going to have a place in the official media? Probably not, because if they have a critical position, they're not going to appear in the official media. So, the media is bound to become an actor, a political actor. It's taking a role that it shouldn't normally have, because those things should be processed in Congress. I mean, if you're going to have a new law about mining or water or whatever, that should be done in Congress. That shouldn't be done in the media. But if you have no way to process those conflicts, the media is going to give voice to those who are not being represented. So it becomes extremely complex. And I think it's going to escalate even more. And it has become a war, because now the media is the opposition. It's the only opposition that is left. The opposition people in Congress don't have enough power to change anything, even to negotiate. So the media is going to be the political actor in the case of Ecuador. But the same thing is happening in Venezuela. The same thing is happening in Bolivia. So the governments have found a perfect enemy, because people don't like journalists that much, don't like media that much. It's an easy enemy. If suddenly you don't have a newspaper in the morning in your house, well, nothing happens. Nothing really happens. Now you're going to say, oh, yeah, El Universo used to be a nice newspaper. Oh, that TV station, the soap opera. When RCTV, when Radio Caracas Televisión was shut down in Venezuela, people were sorry that they couldn't see their favorite soap opera. They were not too worried about the news.
You're breaking the heart of all the journalists in the audience.
Not for the first time.
Do you concur with Pablo about the question about the parallel role that journalists play?
I think it happens, but I think there will come the time when people is going to get tired. We heard the panel this morning, someone mentioned that credibility of the press is diminishing in Latin America. And people know. I mean, I don't think people in Latin America want to have a press playing the role of the opposition. I don't think that's what they want. So the big question is, why is the press losing its credibility?
Yes, I want to add is when the press as a political actor obviously is totally bad because the society know that. The society is not stupid and that's happened. It decreased the credibility. But but the amazing thing is not only the society that don't has credibility in the media, it's the journalists too. All the morning, every journalist say, the media is awful. Yes, we are agree. Yes, and we need to do something, and we in all the panels, the recently panels that I've been, all the people say, it's an amazing era because everybody can to produce and send information. Yes, it is true, and everybody talk about the citizen journalism. It is true, and why the journalists don't do it? The journalists are specialized in analyze information, into produce information, and why we don't do that? Yes, we don't agree about the general media. I don't talk obviously about my media in specific or some media in specific, but in general media, something's happened. Yes, and the journalists, as me, as Pablo, as Claudia, are interested in the information, not in the business. That and one of the problems in general in the media, as I know, is the media are controlled for managers. They think that the good things in the media is only the revenue in money, and if the numbers are good, they believe that the press is good, but obviously it's not true.
Yeah, I'd like to add that our business is democracy. That's our business. So it's not a matter about numbers. Yes, you're right.
I saw you grab a mic, so I assume you have a question.
Just a comment and a question.
Leonardo is going to ask you who you are.
My name is Cecilia Alvear.
Yes.
I'm a 1989 Nieman Fellow, a self-unemployed journalist at this point, but I was a producer for NBC News for many years. And I'm from Ecuador, and I don't think that our press in Latin America has ever been truly independent. We were more operating along the lines of European journalists, where newspapers in some ways, officially or unofficially, were party organs for different organs. I think the difference now is that it is, more solidly an opposition press. That's my comment, and you can disagree with it if you want to. And I am concerned about the fact that social media is not available to everybody, but I'm observing something very interesting in the Galapagos Islands, where there is really no press available to them, and lately a lot of concerned people have been using social media, Facebook, to organize for social action and activism. So that is interesting and important. That's the way that they are utilizing it. And yes, these are the people who are better educated and who have access to that kind of information. At last, Pablo, if El Universo ceases to exist, if the government takes over, if it becomes like the Soviet Union. In the Soviet Union, people managed to get informed without these tools that we have now. They would like mimeograph information and hand it from people to people. Will something like that happen?
Well, first of all, I agree with the first thing that you said. Newspapers have been traditionally affiliated to certain political movements. That has not been declared. We all know that the New York Times is a Democrat newspaper. We all know that Le Monde is a conservative newspaper in France. I mean, we know the political position of newspapers. Newspapers in Latin America or in Ecuador in particular have pretended to be objective and independent, and they have not declared their political position, and that's one of the reasons they have been attacked so badly. Social media will be extremely important. It is not that important now. But I think this war is not really about freedom of expression. It doesn't have almost any connection to freedom of expression. People are not interested in freedom of expression. People want to have jobs. People want to have better lives. People are interested in improving. People are interested in a government that works. People are not interested in freedom of expression. The people who are interested in freedom of expression is the ones who don't have the power at the moment. That has always been the case. It's the ones who have the power, they don't need freedom of expression. They have the power. It's the others, the ones that don't have, the ones who need freedom of expression. So it's not about freedom of expression. It's about power. It's about the elections, how to win elections. You need to be in the media to win an election. You need to exist in the media. You need to be there all the time. You need to be the main actor. You need to fulfill the dreams of people. You need to embody hope. And you need to control the message if you want to be elected, ideally. So when we're talking about controlling the press in Ecuador, we're really talking about the coming elections. For the government, it would be ideal to make sure that no new leader appears. There's no one who can challenge Correa at the moment. And there's no one who has the media capacity to challenge him in the media. So making sure that all the TV stations are at least quiet, are afraid. All the political spaces that have disappeared in Ecuador. And they have disappeared in Bolivia, they have disappeared in Nicaragua, they have disappeared in Colombia. They disappeared in Peru during Fujimori times because he was bribing the newspaper owners. So it's about power and it's about the elections. And it's a fascinating thing because 30 years ago, we had dictatorships who were not too worried about forms or the democratic facade. And now we have these governments who are interested in winning the elections at least, which is an interesting turn. Sorry.
I'm getting the signal that we're right up against 2:30. I think that's what this means. Yes. And so I want to thank the panel very much for their contributions. And to thank you for your questions. And the next panel starts at